I've been thinking a lot this week about how the in-between moments sometimes are the most important moments. How sometimes what happens in the intermission is more important than what happens in the play itself. How often when we're at conferences, the most important conversations happen during break time. I want to bring our attention together to one of those moments today. Here's where we are in our people's story. Joseph the dreamer has been thrown by his jealous brothers into a pit, and Reuven, the oldest brother, very nobly convinces the other brothers not to kill Joseph with their own hands, quietly planning to return to the pit later to rescue Joseph. But that plan, of course, is thwarted by the brothers. Joseph, alone in the pit, is flailing, and the brothers coldly and cruelly sit down and have a hearty lunch by the edge of the pit. And this is when Yehuda, proposes that they sell Joseph into slavery. And for 20 pieces of silver, that's exactly what they do. Joseph is sent off to enslavement in Egypt, presumably never to be heard from again. The brothers, cowards that they are, return home to their father Jacob, and they tell him that his beloved son is dead. And Jacob begins grieving inconsolably, a grief that will persist for the next couple of decades. 2 chapters later, Joseph is in Egypt, where he is enslaved by Potiphar and ensnared by Potiphar's wife, framed for a sexual assault that he didn't commit, which, as we know, will land him in prison, where his dream interpretation skills will eventually lead him to Pharaoh and ultimately grant him the power and the opportunity to save those very brothers that plotted against him. But in between those two major acts of our story, the first in Canaan and the second in Egypt, is a strange and somewhat disorienting interlude. It begins with chapter 38, and it sounds like this. Vayehi be'et ahi, vayered Yehuda me'et achav. About that time, Judah, or Yehuda, left his brothers. Judah, we learn, becomes estranged from his family shortly after he encourages them to sell their brother Joseph into slavery. He goes far away. He marries a woman, and he has 3 sons. That firstborn son eventually marries a woman called Tamar, but shortly thereafter dies. Now, according to biblical law, and you can ask Rabbi Dr. Devorah Weisberg about this if you're at all curious afterwards, because she is literally the world expert on this. According to biblical law, a woman is obligated to marry her dead husband's brother, thereby fulfilling the obligation to have a child for this family. And Tamar, therefore, dutifully marries her dead husband's brother. But then again, something goes terribly wrong, and this brother dies too. Now, Judah, having lost 2 of his sons, convinces himself that it's his daughter-in-law Tamar's fault, that she is somehow cursed, and he fears that if he gives Tamar his 3rd son, this 3rd son too will tragically die. So he instructs Tamar to just wait until this boy is old enough to marry her, and he stalls for time. But with each passing year, it becomes increasingly clear that Judah, Yehuda, has no intention of letting his 3rd son anywhere near Tamar. And this leaves her imprisoned, chained in a marriage to 2 dead men and their family. Eventually, in desperation, Tamar takes matters into her own hands. Hearing that Judah is coming to the neighborhood, she takes off her widow's garment and she dresses like a prostitute. Judah sees her and propositions her for sex, and rather than money, she says she will take his seal, his staff, and his wrap in pledge. Several months later, as you may recall, Judah grows indignant when he learns that his daughter-in-law Tamar has become pregnant. What a disgrace she's brought upon the family. He orders that she be burned to death. But it is at this moment that Tamar sends Judah his own seal and wrap and staff and says, "The one who owned these items is the one who got me pregnant." This moment, this interlude, is the great turning point in Judah's life, and arguably the moral turning point in the whole book of Genesis. Because here Judah, the cold, calculating manipulator, sees the seal and the staff and the wrap, and Vayaker Yehuda, he recognizes it. He recognizes all of it. He recognizes his stuff. He recognizes his guilt over Joseph. He recognizes that in his heartache over his own father's anguish for Joseph, in his grief over his son's deaths, that he has calloused toward other human beings, most especially toward Tamar. Tamar's humanity shatters what had been an impenetrable casing around Yehuda's heart. Tzadka mimeni, he proclaims, she is more righteous than I am. Tamar goes on to give birth to twins, and only then does the text return to the story of Joseph, the main act, and his travails in Egypt. Why is this strange interruption in our story? Why is it here? Because while we weren't paying so much attention, something of tremendous significance has occurred. Here I turn us to the wisdom in Parshat Vayeshev of Nitivot Shalom. Regarding the verse, the Midrash says, and it was at that time that Judah went down from his brothers, the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah teaches the following. The tribes were busy with the sale of Joseph. Reuven was busy with sackcloth and fasting. Jacob was busy with sackcloth and fasting. Judah was busy taking a wife for himself, but meanwhile, the Holy One, the Kodesh Baruch Hu, while everyone else was busy scheming and grieving and loving and lying and living, the Holy One was busy birthing the light of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, planting within Tamar and Yehuda's son, Peretz, the possibility of the redemption of the world. Nitivot Shalom explains the significance of this teaching. It was precisely at the moment that our ancestral family was at its lowest, its most degraded, its most broken state. The moment that the people Israel, that the family Israel had become completely shattered, that God responds to the brokenness by birthing something completely new. The rupture that they experienced brought forth the possibility of complete healing, dignity, and peace, both for their broken family and for all of humanity. And all of this possibility is embodied in the character in the Torah that you have never paid attention to. Peretz, the son of Tamar. Peretz, who becomes the ancestor of King David, and one day the Messiah, the one who will come to usher in a time of redemption for us all. Before any new growth, writes Nitivot Shalom, there must first be a state of absence or decay. And here I think of the work of my sister and so many who love to get their hands in the soil. Sometimes Nitivot Shalom says a seed needs to decay completely, and when it does, there is no spark of life left in it at all. From that state, it will never again be capable of sprouting. But sometimes a seed that is destined to sprout appears as though it is dead. But in fact, it must first degrade and decay, leaving only a hint or a spark of life, kusta dechiyuta, within it. It is from that remnant that new growth begins. From this, we learn that new growth is born precisely out of catastrophe. In the Jacob and Joseph narrative, there was not one single person in the entire house of Israel who was left intact. The entire family, the entire people had been shattered by lies and deception and violence. And yet it was precisely from that state of absence that little Peretz was born. A small boy with the kusta dechiyuta, with the spark of life buried deep within, the life force waiting like the trees in the dead of winter for the moment to emerge. For Netivot Shalom, the kusta dechiyuta, that spark of life, exists in every one of us. We might not even know that we have it, but we do. It is born out of our refusal to accept reality as it is, to insist stubbornly and unyieldingly that something better is possible. We say in our family that for the Brouses, stubbornness comes from both sides of the family tree. Well, that is a profoundly Jewish characteristic, according to Netivot Shalom. Even grief itself, he writes, is an expression of non-acceptance, of recognizing the reality of the loss, but at the same time refusing to succumb to that reality. It is the awareness that the end is never really the end, that something new might always yet be born. This is what Walter Brueggemann calls prophetic grief. Grief rooted in a stubborn insistence that the final chapter has not yet been written. That relentless refusal to accept that the world is as it must be is our most audacious spiritual claim as Jewish people. And it emerges precisely when we, like our ancestors in this story, are in our lowest and most desperate state. Ki nafalti kamti, writes the prophet Micha. Though I have fallen, I will rise again. Ki eshev b'choshech Adonai orli. Though I sit in darkness, I trust that God is my light. Or in the words of Chumbawamba, I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never going to keep me down. In this way, it is precisely our deepest anguish that becomes the spark of life from which that new growth will emerge. This week, one of my beloved mentors and teachers confessed to me that his heart aches with grief and worry not only for the state of Israel, now ruled by messianic extremists for whom there seems to be no bottom, but also for the Jewish people who are tearing apart at the seams, so disoriented by fear and grief and anguish that they seem to have lost their anchor altogether. What will come of us, he asked me. What will we do when everything we love is being threatened all at once? And it strikes me that Netivot Shalom's wisdom is more needed now than perhaps ever before. Sometimes the answer emerges precisely as the question is being asked. The very same day that I had this conversation with my teacher, videos were released of Hirsch and Eden, Carmel and Ori and Alex and Almog, 6 of the Chatufim, the hostages, who had been abducted from the Nova Festival and the border kibbutzim. These were made as propaganda videos. They were shot in the tunnels where those hostages languished for nearly a year before they were executed in August of 2024. And in the videos, which I'm sure some of you have seen, the 6 are lighting Hanukkah candles, improvised out of paper cups, and they are singing Ma'osur. At one point, they make each other laugh by asking, where are the sufganiyot? Where are those special Hanukkah donuts? And Hirsch then goes on to remind the group of that famous photo of the Chanukiah on the windowsill in Germany, shot through the open drapes, revealing a swastika banner on the building across the street, a symbol of eternal defiance. On the back of that photo, Rachel Posner, who took the picture, wrote, Hanukkah 5692. Death to Judah, so their flag says. Judah will live forever, so the light answers. All the miracles and all of the wonders that have occurred for Israel over the generations, writes Netivot Shalom, they have all been drawn forth through our refusal to accept the reality of our current circumstances. And this stubbornness, this refusal is our eternal strength. It is the kusta dechiyuta. It is the spark or the seed that brings forth the light of hope and the light of possibility. What is the key to our redemption? Refusing to accept the inevitability of whatever trajectory we are on. Refusing to accept that there is simply nothing that you and I can do to turn the tide from a future of violent extremism, of white Christian nationalism, of messianic supremacism, to a shared future A future driven not only by our basest instincts, but by our greatest aspirations. Refusing to give up on the dream of a future in which our anguish becomes not our armor to stop us from feeling for and with other people, but a sacred opening, rethreading us through our greatest pain with the rest of humanity. An opening that awakens us to the shared anguish of that shared humanity. Peretz receives his name because while Tamar was birthing her twins, this little one pushed forth his tiny hand, and the midwife who was there at that moment tied a string around his wrist and declared this one came out first. But then, almost as quickly, he withdrew his hand, and his brother Zerach, meaning radiance, emerged first from the womb. But it's Peretz. It's the one that is born in the breach, who becomes the symbol of that kusta dechiyuta, that spark of life, that seed of our individual and collective healing. Peretz, who if you're not Rabbi Sharon, you barely noticed. Peretz, who appeared and then seemed to have disappeared like the moon that shows its light and then hides, revealing and concealing, revealing and concealing. I am telling you today that something is being born in our time, born amid the callousness and the cruelty, born amid the shattered landscape of Gaza and the Gaza envelope, born amid the broken hearts and the devastation and the destruction, born against the backdrop of the disintegration of our Jewish family and the liberal world order. And we might barely even be noticing it. Sometimes when we're lucky, we might feel its presence, a new spirit, a new life force of possibility. But just as we feel it, again, it is concealed. And we slip back into the pattern of our despair. If you struggle with faith, as I know some of you do, I ask you to believe in this one thing, that while we have all been busy with our plotting and planning and preening and protesting, the Holy One has been busy too, carefully gathering up the shattered pieces of our hearts, and from that anguish, that brokenness, that barrenness, birthing something new in this world, a new seed, a new spirit that will help us heal, that will lead us all toward the light of peace. I don't know exactly where that seed has been planted. I, like you, failed for many years to pay much mind to Peretz, our ancestor, but he was there all along. And I know that our redemptive spirit is there too. So I don't know where that tiny seed is planted, from where that light will emerge. It might be from the loving bond between two beloveds who found each other, and that changed everything forever. It might be from a third grader who was born in the aftermath of her grandmother's death and who came into this world to bring a new sense of possibility and light. It may be born from a new child who allows beloveds in our community to pull joy from the darkness. I don't know where exactly it lives, but I do know that all of this rupture, all of this heartache will not be wasted. So when I light the Chanukiah this year, I will think of Peretz. I will think of that tiny hand pushing its way through the birth canal, the idea that is desperate to be born in our time, the new vision that will make healing possible, the gesture of love in a landscape of loss, the note of care found in the chorus of cruelty, the act of courage and moral clarity at just the right moment, in just the right way. When I light the Chanukiah tomorrow night, I will think of Peretz, and I will think of 6 Jews holding one another, many yards beneath the shattered earth, smiling and joking about donuts and singing quietly, even as they must have feared that they would not make it out alive. And I will hold that image of the Chanukiah on the sill, a sign of defiance that it is precisely in the deepest darkness that something new is born. I believe that that light, that spirit is within each one of you, and it is also within me. It lives within all of us. I don't know for sure how it will manifest, but I trust that it is happening. And I ask you to join me in fighting to make that our deepest truth in the days ahead. Shabbat Shalom and Chanukah Sameach.